It started out like any other quiet Saturday afternoon in our neighborhood. The sun was shining, kids were laughing, and for once, everyone seemed to be enjoying a peaceful break from the usual rush. My two kids were playing with a few neighbors. In front of our house, just riding bikes, drawing with sidewalk chalk, and blowing bubbles. It was all innocent fun, the kind of stuff you'd hope kids still get to do. But apparently, not everyone thought so. That's when she came out, Karen, the woman who always seems to be watching through her blinds. Arms crossed, just waiting to find something to complain about. This time, it was the sound of children playing that set her off. She stormed outside, yelling at the kids to quiet down and accusing them of disturbing the peace. I calmly told her they weren't doing anything wrong. But instead of talking it through, she pulled out her phone and called the cops. CS. The actual police on my children. I was stunned. My kids looked terrified. The other parents gathered, unsure of what would happen next. We waited as the squad car pulled up, and I could see Karen standing there, arms waving dramatically, giving what I could only guess was her over-the-top version of events. I expected the worst. I mean, how do you explain to your kids that someone called the police just because they were laughing and playing? But then something unexpected happened. The officers didn't turn toward us. They listened carefully, asked a few questions, and then did something none of us saw coming. What happened next left everyone in shock, including Karen, and it changed the way our neighborhood looked at her forever. The officer stepped out of the car, calm and collected, taking a slow look around. The kids had already stopped playing by then, clearly confused and scared. I could feel my heart pounding, trying to keep my cool for their sake. Karen, on the other hand, launched into a full speech about how the kids were being unruly, too loud, and making the neighborhood unlivable. She kept pointing at the chalk drawings, the toy scooters, even the bubble wand-like. They were signs of chaos. But what she didn't realize was that this officer had probably seen real disturbances. This wasn't one. As she went on, neighbors slowly began to gather around. Some quietly nodded in disbelief. Others took out their phones. The tension in the air was thick. People were starting to whisper. It wasn't the first time Karen had caused a scene like this. A few of the parents near me whispered how she once complained about someone's Halloween decorations. And another time she left a note on someone's car just because it was parked too close to her driveway. But calling the police on children for laughing and riding bikes, that felt like a new low. The officer finally turned to me and asked gently what had happened. I explained everything, how the kids were just playing, how they stayed on the sidewalk, how we were supervising them. The whole time, another parent backed me up. Then a third. The officer listened carefully, nodded, and walked back toward Karen. We couldn't hear what he was saying at first, but Karen's expression quickly shifted. She looked stunned, then confused, then furious. Her hands went up in disbelief. Whatever the officer told her, it wasn't what she expected. Everyone watched in silence, waiting to see what was going on. That's when the officer reached into his pocket and pulled something out. The officer handed Karen a small yellow slip. It was a citation. Her mouth dropped open. She started arguing, waving her arms and raising her voice, but the officer stayed calm, clearly having heard enough. From where we stood, we couldn't hear every word, but a few phrases carried over: false report, wasting police resources, and disturbing public peace. The irony didn't go unnoticed. She had called the cops for noise, and now she was being told she was the one causing trouble. But this wasn't just about one incident. It was a tipping point. As more neighbors gathered, people started opening up. One woman stepped forward and said Karen had once reported her teenage son for playing basketball in their driveway. Another neighbor said she got a complaint from Karen over having too many people at a small backyard birthday. It was like piece by piece. The picture was coming together. Karen wasn't just having a bad day, she had been doing this for months, maybe even years. The kids stood near us, still, unsure whether they were in trouble or not. My son asked me in a quiet voice, "Are we going to get arrested?" It broke my heart. This was supposed to be a carefree weekend, and now they were seeing how easily something simple could spiral into something scary. I reassured him that everything was okay, but deep down, I was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Karen stormed back toward her house, citation in hand, fuming. But the officer wasn't done. Stayed behind and asked to speak with a few of us. He said he'd received similar calls from this street before, often with no real reason. He wanted to know more. That's when a few neighbors started exchanging glances, and one even brought up something Karen had said weeks ago that now felt ... strange. Something about this wasn't just overreaction. It was starting to feel like a pattern and maybe even something more. One of the neighbors, an older man named Mr. Langston, stepped forward and quietly told the officer something that made everyone stop talking. He said Karen had once claimed she was part of the HOA board even, though we don't even have an HOA. She used that lie to pressure new residents, especially younger families, into following rules she completely made up. Some people were so intimidated they actually went along with it, afraid they'd get fined or reported. The officer scribbled in his notebook, now clearly more concerned than before. Another neighbor mentioned how she had seen Karen taking photos of kids playing weeks ago. Not just annoyed glances, actual photos that instantly made several parents uneasy. Why was she documenting kids if she truly believed they were just being loud? Was this some sort of weird obsession, or was she trying to build a fake case? To justify her complaints, the officer asked if anyone had copies or proof, and someone offered to check their doorbell footage. That seemed to get his full attention. Meanwhile, Karen was still pacing near her porch, clearly watching us. You could see the tension in her shoulders, like she was expecting something to blow up, but maybe not like this. She wasn't just being called out anymore. She was being exposed. People who had stayed silent for months were finally finding their voices, sharing stories, and realizing they weren't alone. The fear she'd used to control the block was starting to slip away. The officer then asked if anyone had ever seen her interact with the kids directly, especially when no adults were around. That question sent a ripple through the group. A few people glanced at each other. One mom said slowly, "I think she might have said something to my daughter last week. But she was too scared to tell me." That changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just about noise or complaints. It was about trusting whether we'd missed something much bigger. Right in our own front yards. The moment that mother mentioned her daughter being too scared to speak up, the energy in the crowd shifted. The officer leaned in, gently asking if the girl was around. The mom nodded and ran back inside. A few moments later, her daughter, maybe 7 or 8, shyly walked out holding her mom's hand. She looked nervous, clearly unsure what was going on. The officer crouched down and asked her if Karen had ever spoken to her, or said anything that made her uncomfortable. The little girl hesitated, then nodded slowly. She told me I wasn't allowed to play outside without her permission. She whispered, she said, if I didn't stop making noise, she'd tell the police to take me away. That sentence hit like a punch to the gut. The parents around her went silent. My own kids looked up at me, confused and afraid again. The officer's face went serious. This wasn't just about complaints anymore, was emotional manipulation. And it had clearly been going on longer than anyone thought. But then came the second twist. Mr. Langston, still scrolling on his phone, called out that he'd found something. He showed the officer a video from his security camera dated 2 weeks earlier. It showed Karen standing at the edge of someone's yard, shouting at a group of kids. The footage had audio too. She was saying things like, "This isn't your street and your parents don't belong here." The tone wasn't just strict, it was threatening. The implications hit hard. This wasn't just about someone being difficult. It was starting to feel like Karen had been targeting certain families who had only recently moved in, most of whom happened to come from different backgrounds. The officer's entire posture changed. What began as a noise complaint was now heading into a much deeper investigation, and the entire block stood still, waiting to see just how far this would go. The officer stood up, holding Mr. Langston's phone, and asked if he could keep the footage for the record. The video, combined with the little girl's statement, had shifted the entire situation. Karen, still on her porch, seemed to realize something was wrong. She stepped forward, arms crossed, voice rising as she demanded to know what was going on. But the officer cut her off. Calmly but firmly, he informed her that an official report was being filed not just for false claims, but also for harassment and intimidation involving minors. Her face went pale. Neighbors who had once been hesitant were now openly stepping forward. One after another, people began sharing their experiences with Karen. What once felt like random overreactions suddenly formed a clear pattern. It wasn't just kids. She targeted families who didn't match her narrow view of what the neighborhood should be were the real issue. And now it was out in the open. As the officer walked toward his car to radio in the report, a second unit pulled up. One of the officers handed Karen a notice. It wasn't an arrest warrant, but it was a restraining order filed on behalf of multiple neighbors. She was ordered to have no contact with several families and to stay away from their children. Karen stood frozen, staring at the paper like it couldn't be real. But just as we thought the story had ended, a final twist surfaced. The officer turned back and mentioned that Karen wasn't even the legal owner of the house. A quick database check revealed the property had actually been sold 3 months ago to a rental company. Karen was supposed to have moved out weeks earlier. She'd been staying illegally. Everyone stared at each other in disbelief. The woman who tried to control the whole neighborhood didn't even belong there anymore. And just like that, the power she thought she had vanished in front of all of us. The next few days brought a wave of calm and relief to the neighborhood. Karen was gone by the end of the week, forced to vacate after the property management company confirmed she had overstayed her lease. The officer assured us that all the complaints and evidence were officially logged, and that if she ever returned or caused further issues, legal action could be taken immediately. Parents felt safe again, letting their kids play outside. Laughter returned to the sidewalks, and chalk drawings once more filled the pavement. Neighbors who had once only nodded in passing were now chatting, organizing a weekend block party to rebuild the community spirit that Karen had slowly chipped away. Even Mr. Langston, who'd always kept to himself, showed up with a folding chair and a smile. It was more than just a celebration. It was a reminder that silence can sometimes let problems grow. But when people come together and speak up, real change happens. As for the kids, they learned something too. They learned that being kind and having fun isn't something to feel guilty about, and that adults have their backs when things get unfair. My son still asks now and then, "Will that lady come back?" And I tell him honestly, not if we can help it. Because standing up together calmly, respectfully, but firmly is what made the difference. This whole story started with a simple call about noise and turned into something none of us saw coming. It reminded all of us how important it is to listen, to watch out for one another, and to not be afraid to speak the truth. In the end, the real noise wasn't the sound of kids playing. It was the quiet hurt caused by someone trying to control through fear. But now that silence is gone and our neighborhood feels like home again.